What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I wanted to take a look at Halo Combat Evolved. Now, actually, funny story to just begin us off here. I didn't know that the day I'm recording this on November 15th, this is actually the anniversary of the game releasing 22 years ago. When you guys see it, it'll be 22 years and 2 days. And I didn't plan it out like that, actually. I just said, hey, I want to try Gears of War. You know, we made the video on Gears of War 1 last week, and I thought, you know what? Let's go back to another classic franchise. In this case, I have played Halo. Gears of War, I think I played maybe 3. I've played some of the later games at friends' houses, but I'm actually pretty unfamiliar with the Gears franchise generally. Halo, nope, I've been caught up for a while, and all of the levels of Halo 1 or Halo Combat Evolved, which I want to talk about the title as we go throughout this video, but this brings back so many memories. Not that I played it day one, because I was 5 years old when the game actually came out, but I remember playing this. I have very strong memories of playing it and the Halo franchise just in general, and what this game did, you know, for the industry, for Xbox specifically. We're going to talk about that in this video, and then we got to talk about, you know, the base game. So I went back and played it. Now here's the deal. I didn't play the original. I should have. I actually should have, but I played the Halo Master Chief Collection. I think it's the best place to play it. Actually, I've never played the Master Chief Collection, so I think they've done a phenomenal job over there at 343 and putting everything together, and the multiplayer and just the way that it's set up. You could pick the missions, you pick the difficulties, you pick if you want skulls or not, like everything. Very customizable, I think, and I think they do a really good job. Although they have not, in my opinion, handled Halo very well. Infinite, I did actually kind of like, but, you know, 4 and 5, but besides that, they did a really good job with this collection. So that's where I played. I did not play the original, but I do want to talk about the original. So first release, like I said, November 15th of 2001. It's actually quite an interesting story. I went back, I tried to look up as much as I can. So this was a game that was in development for several years. They were like just putting tape everywhere on this game. It sounds like as it got closer and closer, it evolved from many different things. Chief was originally just called Cyborg. This game started, I believe, as a tactical game, and then eventually kind of transformed into a third-person game. I think the first time they ever showed this game off, it was a third-person game, and that is when Chief was known as just Cyborg, and then it became a first-person game, and that happened very late into the process, and even, you know, the Xbox kind of acquisition, and Bungie pitched themselves to Xbox. They were out of money. They were selling their company shares. They were panicking because they had some issues with games that happened or games that came out right before Halo. So leading into Halo, they were in trouble. They made a deal with Xbox or with Microsoft at the time, and they were getting ready to release their first major console, and the Xbox. And they wanted this game, or, you know, Bungie kind of pitched it to them that, hey, well, what if we put this game out on it? And it worked, and they did it, I think, with a little bit of help from Take-Two at the time, and the game did outrageously well. Obviously, it defined the first-person shooter genre. You had copycat games after it. You had Red versus Blue, which was something that I actually did. I remember I wasn't like major into it. I was never a big Rooster Teeth guy myself growing up. And actually, at the time of watching Red versus Blue, I didn't even know what Rooster Teeth was. But pretty darn, I mean, it was funny. It was engaging. I liked watching it in my childhood, and obviously, you had that kind of spawn off of it. This game, I believe they said the sales figures was around 6 million sales after 3 or so years. It became one of the greatest selling games of the 2000s. I think behind Vice City, it was number 2, and Vice City was number 1. So the game sold outrageously well. I think without it, you probably wouldn't have had, you know, I don't think Xbox really would have made as much of a splash as it did without this game. And what's funny about it, that, you know, again, when reading how all these rights were divvied up, so when they made the agreement, Xbox got the rights to Halo, but Take-Two got the rights to other properties from Bungie. So, like, imagine if that was switched. Imagine if that, like, is not the way it would have worked out, right? It's like Microsoft and their ownership, right, of Halo would not have actually happened. So it's just interesting how it kind of all played out. But the game came out, and it made a gigantic splash with the story, with the visuals, with the sci-fi setting, with the multiplayer, which that's something that I was thinking, okay, well, how am I going to really express the multiplayer in this video? So my memory of playing Halo 1 doesn't, like, I remember playing the story, and I remember doing some sort of split screen, so it had to have been, I think, multiplayer. I don't think I did the single player or the story, let's say, in a split screen. Multiplayer, 2 players, up to 16 players. You had different game modes. You could play it, cooperatively, in single player, the story. That was kind of outrageous for the time. You couldn't really do it. I think you had to have like a wired connection between Xboxes in order to get to 16 playable characters or playable people online. Wild times that you literally could not even get to like the max player. Imagine a game coming out now where you could play with like 64 players, whatever, but you literally can't unless they were all in the same room or all in the same like network. It's like that would be insane, right? And that's what it was like back in 2001, and took a few more years after that. Obviously came to PC. I believe that was like 2003. And the rest is kind of history. You had Halo 2 in 2004, Halo 3 after, and so on and so on. And it became, at the time, such a big game, selling-wise and all that. But then also, obviously, you look back at it now and you say, yep, that is Xbox's biggest, most, famous franchise. Everybody knows Master Chief. Everybody knows, and he's so cool. Okay, so now let's get into the game itself, all right? So I played the single player. I also played the multiplayer. We'll talk about both of them. Single player-wise, it's exactly what I remember it being. I think I watched an Actman video where he pitched the game turned into the television, because the TV show, I think, was an abomination. I think it was terrible, but he did a video where he looked at like every single level, 10 levels in all, and how that would kind of equate to episodes, episode 1, chapter 1, etc. And so I think the levels were like kind of fresh in my mind. I mean, that video is like a year plus old, I think, at this time. But going through it, it's like, oh yeah, you remember the opening, you remember like storming the beaches, basically. Like, honestly, this game reminds me of a few different things. It reminds me of Star Wars, the opening of this game. I didn't see that like in a quick little search that I did of just looking up the history of Halo. I didn't see any comparisons to Star Wars, but I think the idea that the game starts off on a ship fleeing a place, it's fleeing Earth, right? So it's fleeing, and it gets raided by this Covenant force, and they have to hide Cortana. So they take Cortana, like a hard drive, which is very similar to episode 4, and they stick it in Master Chief, and they tell him to, run for it, right? Because if they find Cortana, they'll find the coordinates to Earth. So it's like, all right, that reminds me so much of, obviously, the first Star Wars movie, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's like, well, what if you could play the opening of Star Wars, but you didn't have a villain like, as powerful or as big as like a Darth Vader. So you're getting attacked, and all you have to do is fight Covenant. You have to fight the grunts and all that stuff. And, well, speaking of which, the enemies in this game are awesome. Like, does the game hold up this, right now in 2023? I think in a lot of ways it does. I think in some ways it doesn't, but in a lot of ways it does. The enemies are really cool. There's not too many of them, and I think adding the Flood in was an interesting choice, and definitely, like, energize the game in the second half, because in the first half it's always fun to fight the grunts, and their fun little dialogue, and they're fun, they look fun and they act fun. It's fun to fight like the elites and the jackals, but there's not that many of them, right? There's a limit, and I think by introducing the Flood later on, not only do you continue to just elevate the story, which we'll talk about kind of the general theme there, but you add in this enemy that's really creepy, really weird, and then when they take over, you have these hybrid enemies that somewhat fight like Covenant, but they also fight a little bit differently, and they look completely different, and it's just really cool. So I think that was a good move in terms of variety to keep things, energetic, because although the Covenant is super cool, and it's kind of like legendary that they are still cool now as they were back then. There's like so much personality behind them, their movements, like fighting some of them are genuinely difficult. That's another thing I did not like. I've played Halos, and I've Infinite and all that, and that was not that long ago. This game's hard. Now, I play this game single player. I think this game is kind of designed for multiplayer, for co-op, and I think that's like the way to play it, especially now. I mean, I was playing this thing on normal, and I was getting whooped over. And sometimes, like some levels, I'd make it through much easier than others, but holy God, like some of these levels, I would just get torn apart, especially some of the Flood levels. I think the second half, because there's some levels with them where you're waiting for 343, to open the doors, and they're attacking you, and there's like 50 of them, and it's like, I can't actually take out this many flood. And I mean, again, it's difficult, but it's tactical, I guess, in some degree. You can like crouch and stuff. I guess that's where I tripped up over the game, where it's like, I think mechanically, shooting-wise, the game is still extremely, extremely good. I almost feel like it wants to be more, and maybe that's, again, like the history of this game. It was third person. Before that, it was more tactical. I feel like it wants to be tactical, but you can only do so much. Like, you can hide, but eventually you're going to have to come out, and they run around like crazy, and depending on who it is, like the flood will be very, very aggressive towards you. So it's like you got to be careful, and you can get taken out rather easy in this game. So I'm not saying like it was too difficult. I mean, in some parts it was, but I probably should have played cooperatively, or I should just, I guess, lower the difficulty. That's again, I think the joy of playing the collection, because there is so much customization there that, well, you didn't have that, back in the original. But, again, I mentioned the opening. I think the opening is so iconic. But, again, there's several levels in, especially like when you introduce the flood and a lot of like escaping. You go into an area just to then have to kind of run out. That would highlight actually one of the weaknesses of it. However, I'm glad I looked this stuff up too before I recorded, but after I guess I played, because there were a couple weaknesses I noticed, or at least just things that stood out. One weakness was the, usage of the same stages over and over. And that happens. You go to one place, the door is locked, you have to go down the beach, right, to unlock it. You go back and you go in. Or, you go into the Covenant ship in like the second or third level. You go there, you leave, and then eventually, like in level 9, you have to go back up, but the flood have taken over, right? So it is different, and it's actually like more terrifying and harder, because I think they're just harder enemies, but you're reusing those areas, right? That is something I noticed and said, okay, not that I didn't like it, but in terms of this retrospective and saying, I think amazing game for the time, right? Like 2001, like people were eating good. Nowadays, does it hold up? Well, there is that repetition. I think the mechanics of it are extremely good, but the repetition maybe isn't. Well, turns out like they had much bigger plans for the game. In fact, the game was supposed to be way more open world like than it actually was. Now you could tell, like you can see, and that's cool. Like playing some of those more like storming the beach moments, it's like, yeah, you can imagine that. And actually, you look at even Infinite, right? Really, maybe even taking that to heart and saying we're going to go, even though years and years later, different company, different people. But it's interesting how all that stuff plays out. And then the other thing I noticed, that this is not a negative, this is something that actually saved me, and then I read about it. The arrows, there's lit up arrows that point in several areas of exactly where you have to go. Now, actually, what's annoying is later on in the game, you actually have to reverse yourself. When you're going backwards, you're going against the arrows, not with them. So that kind of gets confusing. You can get turned around. But a lot of this game is like just look at the ground and the arrows will point you where to go. There is a negative in terms of a lot of the areas look exactly the same. Not like the big scale, not like the big chapter, levels, but a lot of the corridors, a lot of the hallways, a lot of the doors. Again, they kind of remind me of Star Wars, but they all look exactly the same. And I was reading, again, a little bit about the history. One of the weaknesses that people criticized them for back in 2001 was not just the repetition for the levels or the like where you're actually going to go, which is like, come on, 2001, you're really going to complain about that. But the other one was everything looking the same, not just that you're in the same areas time and time again, but that everything looks the same. I would agree with that. I would. Now, again, like limitations of the time. Am I going to really critique that hard a 22-year-old game? No, not necessarily. And again, I think the arrows is a smart move. I think that is not a negative. Maybe the repetition of the hallways and situations like that, maybe that's a little bit more of the weakness. But man, the story is actually really good. And I think that still holds up. There's clearly more there. Like, and obviously we learn more afterwards. I didn't know, I never actually read it, like, the prequel book, I believe, released 2 weeks before the game came out. That sold like 200,000 copies. So like people were totally into it. And it was talking about the fall of Reach, which is interesting too, about how all that stuff eventually comes back, right? So I guess why am I bringing that up? Well, this game, it has lore, but it doesn't, like, at its surface level, it really doesn't go too far into it. My personal favorite has always been 2. I remember the levels of 1. I remember multiplayer maps / situations of 2. I remember 2 maybe the most of the obviously, like, I guess 4 on, even Reach I remember parts of, but when it comes to like the OG trilogy, I remember 2, and I think I like 2 the most. But it's just interesting that like there is stuff there, but it's sci-fi and it's futuristic and you got this alien kind of invasion, right? But there's religion. It starts over religion. They see humans as like a blockage that needs to kind of be cleansed. Then you have the flood, which just kind of feasts on all life forms. And then Halo itself, growing up, I really didn't understand like why is it called Halo? And then I like literally the Halo ring and just the importance that has on the story. And I forgot like it's actually the Halo ring, the flood, huge in this game. And I kind of like remembered it more later, like it becomes more of a thing in 2 and 3, but no, like it's there. It's not like, well, you actually land on Halo and then you're in different kind of, quadrants of it. So it's definitely, in front of you. So I guess just how much you take it in. Again, like I probably played Halo 1. Like I got the original Xbox. I got it later. I mean, again, I was 5. I probably played Halo 1 when I was like 8 or 9 years old, which is maybe not the right time to play it because I don't know if you can fully like get everything in, but I definitely remember playing it. And then as I got older, friends had it. I kind of fell out of Xbox. Like I didn't get a 360. In fact, my wife owned it, but I never owned a 360 at the time. And my interaction with, as I've talked about, even with Gears, right? Gears, Halo, etc. were at friends' houses. I played the entirety of Halo Reach at a friend's house, Halo 3 at a friend's house. So, like, I remember, that stuff. But I think story-wise, it holds up. I think the lore, it holds up. I think the gameplay, the shooting mechanics itself, the weapons, I talked about the enemies in the beginning, very diverse, very cool, still holds up in terms of just, like, it's so neat, like the enemy type. But the weapons in this game, oh, yeah, like, there's a lot. There's a lot, and they feel great. Again, that's a testament to the gunplay, but like there's diversity in the weapons, and they're a lot of fun to use. And then you have the multiplayer. Now, again, there's not too many stories I have of, playing it when I was 5 years old because I didn't. We talked about kind of the history with the multiplayer. Played it again now. Now, here's what I will say. I remember the multiplayer maps, just like I said, for like Halo 2 and stuff. If you showed me like a map, I'd say I probably wouldn't be able to name the maps for you, but I'd be able to say, oh, yeah, I remember playing that like against my dad. I remember playing like Halo 2's multiplayer, split screen, just like 3 of us, me, my sister, and my dad. And I would cheat. I would look at, because literally, we're talking 2004, 2005. You're playing on like a 25-inch, probably nothing bigger than say 30-inch TV. It's split up 3 different ways. How are you not supposed to look at the other screens? But don't have those stories with Halo 1. But later on, I remember playing, I had to have. Either I've played it or I've had to have watched it so much that they were engraved. Because when I went to play it now, I thought, oh yeah, I've seen all these maps before. I remember these maps. I'll say this. They are extremely simple. In fact, the weakest thing about, I think, Halo in 2023 is probably the multiplayer, just the maps, not necessarily multiplayer in general. I think it's actually still pretty good. It's very clunky, like it's very heavy. You play Halo Infinite, and then you play this, which it's been a little while since I played Infinite, but I can remember kind of the flowy, I don't even know, like the smoothness, I guess, right? How smooth it is. And then you go back to play this, and it's clunky. It's more heavy. It's I don't know. It's harder to kind of maneuver, and just the way that you can get off kills against people, or in my case, I would get killed against by other people. It is cool. Like multiplayer, I think it holds up. I think it's actually kind of rad that people are still in this Master Chief Collection, I just filtered it to just play Halo 1. So just the Halo 1 maps, and then any mode, but just Halo 1. And it's cool to see, like, I never played the same person twice. There's plenty of people playing it and playing the Halo 1. Halo Combat Evolved, which I actually, and if you guys know, you can let me know. I don't know why it's called Combat Evolved. I prefer that you drop, and just call it Halo 1. In fact, the video title, I'm sure, will be just called Halo 1, hopefully, maybe. I think I would prefer, the no subtitle thing, but that's interesting, too. Multiplayer is good. It's hard. It is, you have to be rock solid, your aiming and precision, which I am just clearly not, but that's okay. That's okay. I had a lot of fun with it, and I think this game largely still holds up in 2023. I'm glad I went back to play it. And now that we started, Gears 1, Halo 1. Well, now we got to keep going. And I'm going to try to get through both those franchises at some point. We'll kind of space them out on the schedule here on the channel. Let me know, as always, what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.